this goes deeper than a friendship. This goes into I'm receiving you and you are receiving me, a spousal relationship, and the veil. Welcome to God and Had. My name is Kasey. I am a Catholic YouTuber who strives to make videos to help you grow in your relationship with Jesus and Mary. And today, I want to talk to you about veiling. So I am very excited about this topic because I've had a long journey with it myself. I grew up with it, barely seeing it ever. I think I saw one elderly woman in our church for when I was growing up, and that was about it and then when I went in high school and I started going on discernment retreats with religious life and seeing it a lot more and starting to question it a lot more. And then 2 years ago, I decided to start veiling. But it's been a long journey for me. Growing up, I had no idea the significance or anything about it and thought it was honestly a little weird. But now I'm to the point where I absolutely love veiling. But basically in this video, what I want to talk about is a little bit of the background behind veiling and just for context, but also I want to talk about reasons why one might veil. I think we're in this beautiful time in the church where more and more people are starting to veil, and a lot more people are starting to question it. Why are people veiling, and should I be veiling? And that's really what I want to talk about today. So we get into some history here. So, I mean, it was part of Jewish culture for women to cover their heads, not just in worship, but also everywhere. It was just part of the culture to cover your head. And so there's like some culture piece to it. And then when it came to like the early church, St. Paul talks heavily about it, which we will see in 1 Corinthians later on. But so the early church, women would veil their head. It was mandated all the way up until 1970. 1970 was when the church came out and said that it was not mandated anymore. So what we see here, the Code of Canon Law, basically what the Catholic Church has said about veiling. This is in the 1917 Code of Canon Law. In paragraph 1262, section 2, it says this: Men in a church or outside a church, while they are assisting at sacred rites, shall be bareheaded, unless the approved mores of the people or peculiar circumstances of things determined otherwise. Women, however, shall have a covered head and be modestly dressed, especially when they approach the table of the Lord. So that is in the Code of Canon Law of the Catholic Church in the year 1917. So that was like the last Code of Canon Law that was put into effect until in 1970 the CDF had this document, and in it they say this: Another objection is based upon the transitory character that one claims to see today in some of the prescriptions of St. Paul concerning women, and upon the difficulties that some aspects of his teaching raise in this regard. But it must be noted that these ordinances, probably inspired by the customs of the period, concern scarcely more than disciplinary practices of minor importance, such as the obligation imposed upon women to wear a veil on their head. Such requirements no longer have a normative value. Okay, so that is what was the CDF said in 1970, and that is what put into the effect that women are no longer mandated to wear a veil over their head or to have their head covered in mass. And then in 1983, a new Code of Canon Law came out, and it didn't issue veiling at all or covering the head at all. So basically what the church stands on it now is you don't have to cover your head if you're a woman. You can if you want to, but it's not mandated anymore. Now, I think the history and the context is important here for reasons to veil. So let's get into reasons to veil. The first reason to veil is tradition. Now, if you think about it, if the early church veiled, and if we want to be as similar to the early church as possible, like why wouldn't women veil? If the early church had Christ and the apostles, and women were veiling, like why would we not want to imitate the early church as much as possible? Also, to think that the church mandated it for 2,000 years, that's like, why would we stop now? And the third reason under tradition of why someone might veil today is if you go to 1 Corinthians 11, with St. Paul, he has a big paragraph on head coverings, is what it's titled. And I'm reading from the RSVCE translation. He says, "I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions, even as I have delivered them to you. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a woman is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Any man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, but any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled dishonors her head. It is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a woman will not veil herself, then she should cut off her hair. But if it is disgraceful for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her wear a veil. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That is why a woman ought to have a veil on her head, because of the angels. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman. And all things are from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not nature itself teach you that for a man to wear long hair is degrading to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her pride, for her hair is given to her for a covering. If anyone is disposed to be contentious, we recognize no other practice, nor do the churches of God." Okay, so don't be too alarmed. St. Paul is pretty strict here in 1 Corinthians 11. Talking about if you're not veiling, then you should shave your head. That's pretty intense. And I think it's very important to read that in context. There's a reason why the church stopped mandating it. And like I read earlier, in the 1970 CDF document, they say it's probably inspired by the customs of the period. And so that's what they reason of why it was such a big deal to St. Paul, is because it was such in the custom of that time. But even if that be the case, even if it be the case that it was just the culture of the time and it has nothing to do with the liturgy, I feel like there is something to St. Paul saying this, that if this is in scripture and St. Paul is this strict on it, then there has to be something here. There has to be some beauty here that we would miss out on if we didn't take it more seriously. Now, do I think if you don't wear a veil you should go shave your head? Absolutely not. But I do think that what St. Paul is talking about here does kind of add a little weight to wearing a veil. But I don't think that, you should have to wear a veil because this is what 1 Corinthians 11 says, because the church has said it's not mandated anymore, and in obedience to the church, I follow that, and no woman needs to be forced to wear a veil. But I guess what I'm saying is for St. Paul to be so kind of heavy on this and strict right here in the scripture, it just points to there being some significance behind wearing a veil. And as you can see, is the veil represents submission to man and to God. And so there's significance behind the veil. So with all of that being said, with the early church doing it, with St. Paul encouraging it, with the church doing it for 2,000 years, all of that fitting under the reason for tradition. And that leads into my second biggest point, is on reverence. Like I said, the veil symbolizes submission to God. When you put the veil over your head, it is an act of reverence for the Eucharist, for God. It's an act of humility. It's an act of saying, like, I am here to receive. The veil symbolizes submission, and submission symbolizes receiving from God. Like we come and we receive from God. In other parts of scripture, it talks about how women are to be silent in the Mass and to receive, because that is our role of being feminine, of being a woman, is just to receive everything from the Lord, which is so beautiful. And what I love about veiling and inside of any church where Jesus is present in the tabernacle or exposed in adoration is that it forces me to have reverence for the Eucharist. When I put a veil on, I am like, okay, I am in the presence of Jesus and I have to be reverent here because Jesus is physically here. Body, blood, soul, and divinity. He is in that Eucharist, and just helps me be more reverent to him in the Eucharist. The third overarching reason, so we have tradition, we have reverence, and now this third reason is because we are the bride of Christ. As women, we get to be the bride of Christ, and every Mass is a wedding feast. Every Mass, we are consummated with Christ. We get to walk down the aisle and receive the Lord, and we become one with Christ. That is a wedding every single time we receive Jesus in the Eucharist. It is our bridegroom uniting with us, the bride, which is so beautiful. And so the veil represents, like, just when you go to a wedding, you see the bride walk down with a veil over her head. And this just goes to show, like, whenever you wear a veil every time during Mass, you're reminded of that, of like, I'm a bride of Christ. And this relationship I have with Christ, it's a spousal relationship. It's a relationship that Jesus draws me in and deeper in. And this isn't just like a friendship, but this goes deeper than a friendship. This goes into I'm receiving you and you are receiving me, a spousal relationship. And the veil reminds us that of that, and that we are a bride of Christ. And not only that, but also to imitate our Blessed Mother. Every time I put on my veil, I am reminded of our Blessed Mother, and I just love being able to imitate our Blessed Mother in this small little way. And then you also think about how as women, we have the unique gift of carrying life in our womb. And Mother Mary carried Jesus in her womb, and because we are able to bring forth life, we have something in our very biology that makes us stand out from men. We have something that men don't, and we have a certain holiness, a certain sacredness that men don't. And that is why we veil, because every holy thing in the church, the altar, the tabernacle, the chalice, the most holy things in the church, they're veiled. They have coverings over them. And so because we have this unique gift of bearing life within us, we get to veil to show that we have something sacred, and we have this gift of bearing life within us. And what's so interesting is that many people view veiling as, especially women, people who are like, yes, woman. Sometimes people view veiling as actually like, as taken away from women, or as putting down, or in a negative light. But honestly, it's the exact opposite. Like, if you want to be a feminist, start veiling, because veiling literally signifies that you have something that men don't. And not only that, but it also reminds yourself that you are a temple of the Holy Spirit. Just like the tabernacle, when you see the tabernacle lace covering over the tabernacle and you know Jesus is inside of it, just like when you have the veil over you, it's just another reminder that Jesus dwells inside of you and that you are a tabernacle for God. The fourth overarching reason is to help you worship. Now, what's super cool is, okay, so just for this reason is that whenever you veil and you have it over you, is, you know when you get distracted at Mass? Well, when you have a veil, especially the infinity veils that go all the way around, it kind of like hovers over your head, and it kind of like forces you to stay straight, to look straight at Jesus instead of like moving side to side and looking around you, because it kind of like hovers over your face, where it kind of just hides the things from the side. And so, and in one aspect, it helps you worship. It helps you stay focused on Jesus, which is cool. But also what I found is that it's been holding me accountable for modesty. like you're not, it's kind of awkward to show up to mass in sweatpants and a sweatshirt and then wear a veil. It just doesn't really look right. And so it has encouraged me, like, since I've been veiling, it's been encouraging me to dress up for the Lord more, to have more reverence in what I wear for him. And then the third way that it helps me worship is that it reminds me that I am in the presence of something holy, that I am in the presence of Jesus. Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity, in the tabernacle, at Mass, on the altar. And when you step outside of that church, when you're in a gym, when you're in your room, you don't have Jesus, like, in the Eucharist in your room, and you're not veiling. So when you step into that church and you put on a veil, you are telling your body, like, hey, there's something different in here. And we are humans, we are body, soul, composite, so what we do with our body actually matters. Because when you are praying on your knees versus when you're laying in bed trying to pray, like, there's a difference in your prayer. So what we do with our body matters. And so when I veil, it reminds me, it's a physical reminder that, hey, I am in the presence of God. And that helps incredibly when it comes to not being distracted during Mass, or helping me pray during the Mass, or pray during adoration. And then kind of like my fifth overarching reason is that it helps others. Now, some people might argue with me on this one, but in my experience, when I go to Mass and I see other people veiling, it inspires me, because it reminds me that something is different about this place. It is a reminder that there's, like, Jesus is here. And that helps my mind and my prayer go so much deeper, so much more quickly too. But it helps others because veiling is a public proclamation that you serve the Lord, that you want to submit your will to God. Like, this veiling is what is a sign to others, and it signifies you submitting your will to God, you surrendering your life to him. And every time you put on that veil, it's a reminder to yourself that I give my life to God, I surrender my life to God. And wearing a veil is that public proclamation that, yes, I want to give my whole life to God. I submit to him with everything, and I trust him with everything. And that public proclamation to others is huge. And then this is just another kind of thing. I've heard this when it comes to veiling, is that as women, we have hair, and being a woman is fun. We get to dress up and curl our hair and all the things, but as women, like, one of the most beautiful aspects of being a woman is our hair. It's beautiful, and because it's beautiful, whenever we're in Mass and we veil, or, like, if you've noticed, like, I've done this several times, but when you go into Mass and you're sitting behind people, I've paid attention to this, but when you start looking at people and kind of, like, looking around, I get very distracted. But I've noticed that when I go to different Masses where almost all the women are veiling, I don't do that, because I'm not trying to figure out, like, oh, there's that person, oh, there's that person, or oh, she looks cute, or oh, whatever, because all the women are covered, and I'm not distracted by all of that. And so because as women, our hair is so beautiful, and whenever, like, it can be distracting to people during Mass, or especially because it's like when you see, like, oh, there's the blonde, there's Kasey, or there's so-and-so, or oh, she has nice hair today, or whatever. It kind of sounds silly, but there's truth to it, because when you walk into a place where everyone is veiled, you can't tell who's who, unless you're standing in front and looking at everyone. And that's what's really beautiful, is because it helps everyone else worship the Lord. It helps people be focused on Christ and not you. So those are just some reasons why someone might veil. There might be other reasons out there why some women veil. If that's you and I didn't hit it, please leave it in the comments. I love learning more about why people veil, why people choose to veil. For me, it's been a long journey. It was not a quick decision. I was introduced to veiling my junior year of high school, and I bought one. And I just, like, never wore it because I was too scared to wear it. But I was very convicted of it, and saw, like, really just, like, the beauty and behind the tradition of it my junior year of high school. And then it's taken me about 7 years to come around to be more convicted of it and continuing to just take it to prayer and ask the Lord about it and feeling more called to start veiling. And so now that I've veiled for 2 years, I can say that it has helped my prayer life. It has helped my Mass experience. It is such a beautiful tradition, and I absolutely love it. And I encourage any woman who is thinking about veiling to just take it to the Lord, take these reasons to the Lord, and pray with it and see if it is something you're called to, or if you just want to, then just do it and try it out. Now, just to answer some objections to veiling, an objection that you might raise is like you might be scared of what other people might think of you. That's valid. It's a real fear. Especially when you start, it's scary. What I did to help with that is I started veiling when I was in private prayer first, and that helped me get used to it, because it does kind of take some time getting used to, because it's really new. But then once you get used to it and you start going to like wearing it during daily Mass and Sunday Mass, it becomes no big deal because you're used to it by then. But do not let the fear of what others think of you stop you from veiling, doing this beautiful tradition. That's my advice. Who cares what other people think? If it's gonna help you worship the Lord better in Mass, do it. Another objection that I hear is that it can disrupt unity in the Mass. And my response to this is, would you if nuns came into your Mass, would you tell them that they are disrupting unity in the Mass because they're wearing their habits, and that they should take their habits off because they are disrupting the unity of the people? No. Nuns wearing habits is also a public proclamation that they've given their life over to the Lord, and there's beauty behind that. And it's the same with veiling. It's a public proclamation that you're submitting your life to God. And if you are at a parish, this was me back home, veiling was not a thing. But then at different colleges I've been to, it was a lot more present, especially the more Catholic colleges. It's a lot more present. And so if you're at a place where there's a lot of women veiling, super easy. I encourage you to do it. Start it then when it's around you and it's super easy. But for those who are thinking about it and you're at a parish where there's no one veiling, or maybe there's just one or two people, and you're kind of worried about the unity piece, I mean, I think that maybe at first, this is what I did when I started veiling, is I would sit in the back and like let people get used to me. I don't know if this is the right approach, but I did want to respect the unity part of the church, but I also was so convicted of veiling, and I think that if we want to be as similar to the early church as possible, and if the church has been doing this for 2,000 years, and then everyone just like stopped because it wasn't forced anymore, I don't think that just because beautiful things aren't forced anymore that we shouldn't be doing them. And this is a beautiful tradition, and therefore if you are someone in your parish who no one else does it, I say do it anyway. I think if anything, it starts conversation in the parish. What I've noticed with me is it's been beautiful to see people come up to me and ask me about it. And then I get to share with them the reasons why I veil, about reverence for the Eucharist. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then it starts conversation about the Eucharist. And it's amazing because we have so many Catholics in our churches who don't realize who they are receiving when they receive communion every Sunday. And so by you wearing a veil and you getting them to think, why is she doing that? There's something serious that she's doing this for. It can get people to start to question the Mass and like, what is this all about? And so I think if you're the only person in your parish, go for it. Unless someone has like a really big fit with you, or if your priest talks to you about it, I would talk to your priest if there's some a problem there. But yeah, what I did is I started sitting in the back for people to kind of just like get used to it a little bit, and then I started moving my way up more towards the front because I like sitting in the front during Mass. But that's just what I did. I don't really know what the best practice is when you start veiling and you're the only person at your church, but there's just a tidbit of advice. And if you think that it might be distracting for yourself, like if you start veiling and you're like, actually, this is kind of distracting to myself because you're like, oh, does it look right? Is it on right? Just know that it takes practice. It takes some getting used to. It's going to be weird for a couple months until you get used to it. But then once you get used to it and it just becomes a habit, that's where it becomes so beautiful because it's a big commitment because you bring it with you everywhere. You put it on your head every time. So those are just some tidbits of maybe you are someone who sees someone veiling at Mass and you're wondering why. Here are some reasons, or maybe you're thinking about veiling yourself. Here are some reasons why someone might veil. For me, personally, I want to be as similar to the early church as possible. That's a big reason. But then also to imitate our Blessed Mother, but also reverence for the Eucharist. Those are like my biggest three. And just that reminder that I'm a bride of Christ. Those things are the biggest things for me of why I decided to, and with that reminding myself to submit my will to God every single time I walk before the Lord. Because every time I put it on, I'm reminding myself to submit myself to the Lord. So I hope this video has helped you in any way, and whatever answers you were, or in whatever questions you were trying to seek answers for. But if you have any questions about veiling, I'm definitely not an expert, but I've been veiling for about 2 years now, and I can say that it has been very life-giving and very fruitful for my prayer life and for my Mass experience and for worshiping the Lord. So please let me know if you have any questions and any comments about how veiling has changed maybe your experience with the Mass, or share your desires for veiling, or if you're questioning it, or things like that. But anyway, I hope this video has blessed you in some way. Please know of my prayers, and God bless.